Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to a very special Shabbat Hagadol, made possible by the Alvin and Violet Harris Memorial Fund, in which we are going to celebrate the work of our poet in residence, Julia Knobloch. Julia Knobloch is a poet, an educator, and rabbi in training at the Ziegler School for Rabbinic Studies. Currently an intern at Temple Beth Am, she was awarded Bruce Geller Memorial Prize AJU Word Grant for facilitating of poetry retreats and workshops. In the past, Julia has served as project manager for UJA Federation of New York, as well as the Union for Reform Judaism, and was active for many years as a documentary filmmaker for National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and European broadcasters. She double majored in philosophy and Romance languages with a Magister Artium degree from Heidelberg University in Germany, and has lived in France, Portugal, and Argentina. The author of 2 poetry collections. We've sent out the links to her latest collection in all of the emails, and I've posted it on Facebook. Please support her by buying the book. That's the last plug for the next 30 minutes. Julia was a 2018 Brooklyn Poets Fellow and is currently working on a series of poems about Los Angeles, please be forgiving, the desert, and forgiveness. Her individual poems have been published online as well as in print magazines and anthologies. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to welcome Julia to the Bima this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for these kind words and for the welcome and for inviting me to begin with, and to everyone here for being here, and to everyone who has made possible that I can be here today. I was going to say, as I said, I was going to talk a bit about love and redemption and poetry. And when I think about love and redemption and the role poetry can play in expressing this connection, I like to think of a delightful, peaceful manifestation. Yet I would be remiss to not note the tough love of sorts that the Haftorah for Shabbat Hagadol gives us in biblical poetry. When it speaks of the coming of the day of the Lord, Yom Adonai Hagadol veHanorah, a day related to but not necessarily synonymous with redemption. The Haftorah is quite a piece of prophecy. It bears a slightly violent undertone at times, just like the festival of Pesach in general. Pesach, for all its springtime miracles of liberation, at its core is not a touchy-feely holiday. There's a lot of blood, death, and trauma, and a triumphant song chanted by exhausted ex-slaves at the shores of the Sea of Reeds. It is a great experience and the beginning of the Israelite redemption narrative towards the land. But it is also fearsome as Malachi hammers into our minds. And while Pesach is commonly referred to as the festival of redemption, it might be more accurate to understand it as the time of our freedom, Zeman Cherutenu. A freedom that is supposed to lead to redemption. Yeah, what does that even mean, redemption? In Tanakh and from the rabbis, we get a few answers. Liberation from slavery, an everlasting portion of a specific piece of land, a reward for keeping the covenant, a restoration to the days of old, a time when the world will be perfected not only for the Israelites, but for all humankind. We redeem a coupon, we get something in return. Sometimes that's a firstborn, as in Pidyon Haben. We redeem ourselves, we make up for something we did wrong. By and large, the Hebrew root of the word we translate as redemption is Gimel Aleph Lamet, Ga'al, or Geulah. In Shirat Hayam, the song at the sea, it appears toward the end. Nachita b'chastecha amzu ga'alta, nehalta be'oscha et neve kodshecha. You lead forth in your kindness this people that you redeemed. You guide them in your strength to your holy abode. Redemption here seems to mean being taken out of something by an act of love and put on a path towards a better future. There's another root that describes divine actions that intervene in a positive way, and that is Yud Shin Ayin. Hine Yeshuati eftach velo efrad, ki azi v'zimradia Adonai vayehi li lishua. Look, God is my salvation. I trust and fear not. For my strength and my power is Hashem, and he became my salvation. These lines are familiar to us from Havdalah and again from the Song at the Sea. I have intentionally translated the words based in Yud Shin Ayin as salvation and not as deliverance or rescue. I appreciate that our avoidance of the word salvation, by and large, is related to it connoting a more Christian and not a Jewish theology. But the Hebrew root Yud Shin Ayin has always been there, before the advent of such theology, and the Koran Siddur is with me. To be sure, salvation and redemption are not the same. Salvation seems to happen to us, while redemption seems to require our contribution. God may have saved us through the wondrous parting of the sea, but we must do our part to redeem ourselves. Why do I talk so much about salvation? Because my recent poetry collection is called Book of Failed Salvation. And some folks point out that it is not a Jewish title. The pshat is that I was in love, when I wrote most of those poems, with a Jewish guy named Josh. Josh, or Yehoshua, a name connected to the root Yud Shin Ayin, didn't love me back. Hence the failed salvation of the book title. The working title of the manuscript was the Book of Joshua, but I wanted something less pshat, less confined, because the poems are about more than this one person or experience. They explore universal truth and aim to insert themselves into the long tradition of Jewish poetry, that is, to express a human desire for secular redemption, the fulfillment of a viscerally longed-for event, with vocabulary and imagery that stem from religious context. It's a perfectly fine Jewish title and book, and after Shabbat, should it ever end, as the rabbi encouraged you, you can order a copy and judge for yourselves. I will also read a few poems, one at the end of this davar, and a handful more, a couple at the end, at the teaching. Not only in Jewish poetry is it a common trope to liken the experience of lovemaking, to encounters with the divine, because it may be the most intense sensation we humans can think of when we imagine what it might be like to know God. The Israeli scholar Mishael Masvari-Caspi wrote, "The significance of the idea of the desire of a man for God is like a pleasure of the flesh, and to cleave to him is like being drunk with wine." Poetry explores and gives shape to our deepest emotions, be they secular or spiritual. The longing to become one with the beloved, with the universe, with God, to suspend time, to feel immortal. The verses from Havdalah and Shir Dayam that I quoted before are also found in Isaiah, at the conclusion of a passage filled with messianic visions, the Haftorah for the 8th day of Pesach. Here, redemption has settled into a pastoral, a bucolic natural state ideal. From those pastures, it is not far to an erotic dream of being with a lover in the woods or in a luscious garden, in an attempt to come as close to the earth as possible, the springtime earth that brings forth life, just as the act of love does, or could, or might. A condoned version of paganism, as it were. I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. You are wholly fair, my beloved, my friend. There is no blemish in you. With me from Lebanon, bride, with me from Lebanon come. Gaze from the peak of Amanah, from the peak of Seir and Hermon, from the lion's dens, from the leopard's mountains. Many love poems in Shir HaShirim, the Megillah read on Pesach, use descriptions of nature to highlight an abundance of sensuality. The remote Lebanon mountain range appears repeatedly as the realm for lovers. No matter how you read Shir HaShirim, as a pious allegory for the love between God and Israel, or the straightforward eroticism of an awaited union between two humans, it has shaped the vocabulary of secular and liturgical Jewish poetry and song to this day. Here's the scholar Caspi again. The limits of secular and sacred are unclear, and any attempt to fix those boundaries is most difficult. The elements of the sacred poem exist in the love poem and vice versa. Or these two are integrated to express the idea of redemption and the awareness of its nearness. We find a similar closeness of love and redemption also in our liturgy, for example, in the Shema blessings. Love comes right before and redemption right after the Shema. About this choreography, Raymond Chandlin, expert in Hebrew medieval poetry, writes, "There's a potential thematic link between the Ahava and the Geulah, the certainty of God's love for Israel, which is the object of the benediction in the former, is both the consolation for Israel's tribulations and the guarantee of its future redemption." Let us now consider what it means to lose this certainty. It is like being expelled from the lush landscape of Lebanon cedars, mountains dripping with wine, breezes of herbs and spices, and ruddy-cheeked shepherds, where everything that we will sow will sprout into evergreens. It is like having been brought into freedom during midnight and never seeing the dawn on the horizon. It is like feeling rejected by the beloved, as if deemed unworthy of their love, for reasons we tend to imagine are our fault. In secular, unrequited love, it usually is not our fault. In traditional rabbinic exegesis, however, it is on us when God withdraws God's love. And this is what happens in Eicha, the counterpart to Shir HaShirim. In Eicha, the Megillah we read on Tisha B'Av, devastation has been brought down on the city and people of Jerusalem, and the city and people of Jerusalem on account of their wrongdoings. Love is absent. It is striking that the passages in Shir HaShirim where the lovers are separated are set in a Jerusalem that feels slightly eerie. Let me rise and go around the town, in the streets and in the square. Let me seek him I love so. I sought him, but I did not find him. The feeling of dread intensifies and violence creeps in. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen who go around the town found me. They struck me. They wounded me. They pulled my veil from me. Have you seen him I love so? Soon afterwards, she finds her beloved, and yet I hear a faint echo from Eicha here. I picture a frantic individual roaming a desolate city, longing to hear once again the joyful sound of the voices of groom and bride in the streets of Jerusalem. The loss of love, the mourning of a trampled garden for a destroyed temple, that is the experience of galut, of exile, the opposition of redemption. How can we keep the love? One thing that helps solidify intimacy is trust. Trust in ourselves, in our judgments, in our emotions, and trust in other people. When this trust is disappointed too often, the path to a bright future might be barred forever. Losing trust in a person we once relied on is like losing the desire to find them again. Unlike the woman in Shir HaShirim, searching the streets of a not yet destroyed Jerusalem. She may have worried that she wouldn't find her lover, but she never really stopped trusting that she would. Or unlike those biblical Israelites who did not lose trust that following God's way, the long way God pointed to with a strong hand and outstretched arm, could ultimately lead to better days. New days, days of old, days to come. It feels right in our world of calamities to say, move towards redemption with love and trust. It seems like a helpless afterthought against the backdrop of images of actually destroyed cities, where lovers once walked and lives were enjoyed. Can I offer love and poetry and trust as means to redeem even a tiny part of our world? I think I can. I believe that we need love and poetry and trust to keep us alert and engaged. If such a perspective were moot, why would we recite the prayer for peace responsibly? A prayer that conjures up an eschatological utopia in poetic verse. Lyrical love poetry is sometimes dismissed as change agent because it seems less concerned with current affairs and takes no ostentatiously cool stance like war reportage or spoken art word. But lyrical poetry deals with real life and calls to action as well, if in more veiled and delicate ways. By irrigating our senses and affections, it strengthens our desire to care for the world and solidifies our faith, our trust in our capacity to do that, however limited these capacities might be. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. Actually, this is why I think we reach Hashirim on Pesach, not because it's springtime, or because the Israelites marry God. They don't. They get introduced. But to remind us that we need to love and feel loved to work towards redemption. There's a line in the title poem of my chapbook that asks, "What else is love if not salvation?" Obviously, the word choice is related to the pshat I shared with you. But the line could also go, "What else is love if not redemption?" Elijah is traditionally the harbinger of the Messianic age, and we keep the doors open for him. Major sections of Tanakh end with the Israelites outside of the land and with the hope to return to God's love. The Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol, 1 week before the great and fearful day of the coming of Pesach, ends on a similar note, and it doesn't matter that humans had to will it that way. Actually, this twist of repeating the more optimistic line underscores our human agency. Eicha too ends with trust in the days of old, as does my book, of which I'll read the last poem, which is named after the neighborhood where we are now, sort of, Westwood. This corner was your corner. It still is, will always be. The traffic lights could never change fast enough when I drove west against the sun. Backlit palm trees and the sky here that turns wide late in the afternoons. 3 months, the best place in Los Angeles. I'd cut through the yard, skip over succulents, prickly shadows swaying, behind the screen door you. Persian food and raw carrots, always a rest of ice cream in the freezer, sparkling water. Your thoughts on paper strewn across the floor, vintage posters on the walls askew. Please sit, eat, have some more. Your smile. Slant light in the staircase, your bedroom door ajar. We did not keep our promises. The house is gone, but we are here, cross-legged on oriental cushions, debating what it means to look ahead to the days of old. Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to more teaching later.